Science and religion, errors and omissions. Um, when I was talking about Persinger's uh, God helmets, when he was doing the experiment with students, he locked them away and asked them what they experienced when they came out. I neglected to comment as well that they saw white tunnels of light. And that's what also people that have had near-death experiences also mentioned that as well. The other thing is he felt, as I say, he didn't want to come back, and a lot of the near-death people experience the same phenomena. The exaltation, somewhat similar that you get in some religious gatherings. Now, the other omission was your atoms are composed of positively charged protons. So why don't they fall? Why don't they fly apart? Why don't you fly apart? Because positive charges repel. So what's keeping you together? And what's keeping you from flying apart? And what's keeping your nucleus of your atoms together? It's a force that must be stronger than the electromagnetic force, and it's called the strong force. So you should also let that force be with you. And how did Hubble know that the stars were receding from the Earth, they were going away from the Earth? Well, light is both a particle, photon, and a wave. And you can see it's a wave by holding up two fingers close together and looking through them with one eye. You'll see lines in between your two fingers. And they're caused by the interference of waves. They're called interference lines. Similar to when you throw, say, two rocks in a pool, they form waves, and the waves will interfere with each other. So Newton, back in the 1600s, he discovered that when you pass light through a prism, it breaks up into the several different colors, like the colors of the rainbow, from red up to indigo. Indigo is like a dark purple, and the frequency or the wavelength of the red light is larger than the wavelength of indigo. That means the frequency of red light is lower than the frequency of indigo light. Now, sound is also propagated by a wave. So you hear a train coming towards you, and the waves are being squashed together. So the wavelength is less, frequency is higher. And when the train goes by you, they're being pulled apart. So the wavelength is greater, and the frequency is less. So when it's coming towards you, it goes from a high frequency to a low frequency, from a high pitch to a low pitch, and the sound drops. Well, light as well is propagated by waves. So it's going from a high frequency towards a low frequency. In other words, a red shift from the indigo towards the red. And by using a spectroscope, because each color has a different signature, you can then see that the light from the star is shifting towards the red, therefore must be going away. And then thereby figuring how long it took for it to get to this stage, you can go back to time equals zero. And as I say, when time is equal to zero, science does not have any clue, any definitive clue of what it means. Just like when you divide by zero in math, you get infinity or singularity. Or as I say, all hell breaks loose. You could equally say all heaven breaks loose, and science would be in no position to say anything different. Because really the smallest unit of time that Planck came up with was 10 to the minus 43 seconds. Now, I also mentioned that Higgs predicted there would be a Higgs particle in the mid-century, mid 20th century. It's actually quite early, much a bit earlier than that, 1912. But it took up to 2012 before they found the Higgs particle. So almost a century. They predicted it before. Now, I mentioned about Carl Sagan, who was a great scientist. He wrote the original Cosmos series, which explained the cosmos. And he came up with the expression, people are stardust. And as I said, they're only all the atoms except hydrogen is stardust, created as the stars. Another expression he had was the pale blue dot. Like when you're out in space, you look back and you see this pale blue spot in the middle of darkness, and that's the Earth. Blue because it's 2/3 is covered with water. So I omitted to say that. And I might have said there are 200 million galaxies, more like 200 to 200 billion galaxies. Now the scientists have made, even reputable scientists have made colossal mistakes. One was, I mentioned about Wagner. Now I might have mispronounced his name. It may be called Wagner, Wagener, and that was in 1917. And it took to 1956 before he was exonerated. Okay. I think I did mention that yeah, of course they had their opinion, the scientific opinions, or they felt that was not possible. Rather than following the evidence, they followed the consensus of the scientific community, which is wrong. And as Einstein said, when they questioned him as well about his fact that gravity is a warp in space-time, they said, well, the most scientists don't believe that. Their opinion is, and he said, rightly, all I need is one scientist with one piece of information or a fact or evidence to prove that I'm wrong. And he had spent most of his career trying to combine the two world theories, one his own, the Einsteinian world version, and also the quantum. The other, the man who said that anyone that thinks they understand quantum mechanics doesn't understand quantum mechanics was Feynman. Yes, the other fact that you should sort of be aware of is that often people say, well, it's scientifically proven. It's a scientific fact. Well, as I have pointed out, the science changes from year to year, and even from century to century. Everyone thought, of course, that gravity was the attraction of two objects, like Newton said. But of course, 200 or 300 years later, Einstein said, no, it's a warp in space-time. So sometimes it's and if you want, a closer to the truth, and sometimes it's all totally out to lunch. Now, one of the things that's happened in the last while is the COVID-19. And of course, many jurisdictions and countries said, well, we're going to follow the science, but the science seems to change on a monthly basis. And some of the science you can't is manipulated. Sorry. For instance, the Chinese, where it started, didn't uh, didn't let the world know that there was an outbreak for several a long time after it happened. They tried to cover it up, and when they could no longer cover it up, they gave out false information. Uh, WHO, the World Health Organization, they have influenced the Chinese influenced that because, of course, it was the first place where it broke up, and they said that no, you don't really need masks, or don't need to ban travel. And meanwhile, they were going around and buying up as many masks as they could on the world market, including Canada sent some masks over to China. And then, of course, we needed them, Northern Canada needed them a month later. And when we asked for we got some back, were not up to par. So you can't sometimes trust, especially of China. Sometimes people could they misuse science, or say that it's scientifically proven or a fact, and it really isn't. It's maybe just a hypothesis, or maybe it's even being manipulated and being told falsely for their own benefit. Now the salvation then is going to be a vaccination, and the medical community and the scientific community haven't always been forthright about vaccinations. They have not, for instance, said that there could be harmful replications from viruses. There have been women who have said that their children, right after vaccination, have showed signs of autism. And in the past, the medical profession and the medical scientific, they've used mercury in a lot of their medicines and in the vaccinations, because mercury can fight infection, and it also is a good preservative. But mercury does harm your brain. Just recall the Mad Hatter, who used mercury to cure to make his hats, became mad. And whether or not they still use mercury in the adjuvants, well, it's hard to tell, because they don't require them to do really blind studies, nor do they allow anyone to sue any people that manufacture vaccinations. It's against the law to sue them. So if someone does have a harmful result, they are not held accountable. Now, got his name here, Ezra Levant, Ezra, and his last name is Levan, in his book China Viruses. He points out that the medical profession started to do massive inoculations of children, and I think it's the 1990s, where they combined several different vaccinations when the child was born or slightly after. And he mentioned that, and I have the figure here, that back in 1987, there was 1 in 10,000 people that had autism. And now today it's 1 in 166, and that coincides with when they started out the massive inoculations. Nor have they done any comparisons or blind studies with using religious sects that do not allow any vaccinations. because their instance of autism is very much, way, way lower than the population as a general. So is there, if you want, a cover up, or is there? Are they afraid? Do they do they do they know that these are there's evidence that supports that, or do they say it's not true, or it's just a coincidence, or are they afraid to say it so that people may be scared into not getting the vaccinations, which can help mitigate the spread of diseases on the population as a whole. So remember that often the scientific community is wrong. They don't follow all the evidence instead of just their opinions. Now, again, science can be used for harm rather than good. Scientific discoveries, and there have been many, and they can be used for, they can be abused. And here again, I go to China. Now, China is a totalitarian dictatorship, and that there's 5 or 6 different criteria that you can measure that phenomenon by. One, there's only one party. There's no opposition. And so there's only one party, and his name is actually I can't pronounce it. It's Xi and then Jinping, and he's just declared himself to be the supreme ruler, if you like, for the rest of his life. So there's no opposition for the government as a whole. And also the government, there is a, if you like, group politics. There's only one philosophy, if you like, that everyone must comply with, i.e. communism. And if they don't comply, in one of the cases in one of the largest provinces, there's the Uyghurs who do not fall into the right category as far as the rulers are concerned. They don't even speak Mandarin, and they are not, if you like, belong to the ruling group, and so they are attempting to modify them, and they put them in concentration camps for their retraining, but they're not allowed out, and it's barbed wire around it, and their children are, of course, taken out and indoctrinated into the right way of thinking, the right ideology is the word I was thinking of. So that's another criteria for a dictatorship, a totalitarian state. The other thing is they control all of the media, and they don't allow any media, any independent media, that would question any of their actions. So they can, if there's anything that comes out, they attempt to cover it up, or they can spin it whatever way they want, and there's no opposition, because they don't allow any opposition to it. Any of the Uyghur Chinese that have traveled or are in, say, in different countries, they're afraid to speak out, by the way, because their relatives back in the province in China would be persecuted. Now they're using, as I say, you can use technology and science for bad things. They have their 5G, I think it is, Huawei, very powerful telecommunications. They can monitor their population, even identify them by their facial features. And of course they have the million people that they've incarcerated of the Uyghurs, the remaining, that's about 10%, the remaining, they give them identity cards, and which they have to use to almost do anything, so they can monitor and tell exactly where they are. They have their, of course, their cell phones monitored, so they can tell what they're saying. So it's really uh, like 1984, Orwell's 1984, Big Brother. It's tame in comparison to what the Chinese are doing. And they're using science and technology. And I would argue that it's an incorrect use. The other thing, of course, is the government controls the police. It's not an independent police force or independent judicial system. So they've incarcerated Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, two Canadians, trumped up charges, national security. They say that if they don't have any real evidence, because Canada arrested the vice president of Huawei at the behest of the United States, because we have a extradition treaty with them. So China tried to bully us into releasing her, despite our supposed independence of the government from the judicial system. And China, of course, the law, no one can have if you're arrested, that's pretty well it. 90% chance you'll be found guilty, and you don't have anyone fighting for you. You don't have any lawyers or anything that would try to fight for your innocence. So it's both the independent, the police and the media and the judicial system is not independent from the government like they are in democracies. And of course, they also control the army. So you should not trust anything coming from China. Period. Now, another way that science could be abused. Again, we're getting so scientific is becoming so powerful that we can modify plants, genetically modify plants, or animals, or humans. So, if you get a dictator, so you can modify humans to be more like the group identity of the people in power. And you might think that's absurd. But if you get into the far left, the left-wing ideologues, where they believe in group identity, they believe that the group has more rights than the individual, like communism. There is a equality of outcomes, which is a system that the Soviet Union and China now are practicing. It proved to be disastrous for the Soviet Union. It was a race to the bottom, because it didn't matter what you did; you had the same outcome. So the trick was to do the least possible to get the same outcome. A race to the bottom. Whereas in the Western world, democracies, where they have laws for the individual, rights of the individual, then it is a hierarchy. Yes, the more you try, the better you are, and the harder you work, the more you'll be rewarded. But you should, of course, have equality of opportunity, but that's quite different than equality of outcome, equity. So you have to be a little careful then with this, that if you give the the power of the science to the far left, i.e., the radical left wing leading to communism, or the far right, the fascists leading to even the Nazism. Because they will not just use their thought police, which China is using, but they also can use modify the physical characteristics to become more like the favorite group that they belong to. So you need, really, science should have some moral compass, because it's so powerful that you can use it for good or you can use it for bad. And this is where perhaps religion can come in and help mitigate that problem. Because most religions then believe in the sanctity of life and the sanctity of the human being. That the human being is a temple, not to be modified, experimented with. So you have examples where science and the fundamental basis can be somewhat compatible with religion, or can be complementary, because it helps where science is in the dark. It fills in the gaps. But also you can say maybe science is, religion is also needed to keep science in check. So that just because you can execute some things that are proven by science, some new scientific discoveries, you should be very careful that you shouldn't use it for ill purposes. End of story.